Well, thanks very much for sitting
to
down with
see
me
you.
today and for having this discussion. And I'm inspired listening to the children's questions in response to your talk. They were obviously listening. How do you feel after something like that?
It is absolutely the favorite part of my job. It is talking to young people because they're the ones who are inspiring. Because you realize how much they're watching and paying attention and getting involved in their communities. One of the key things I try to convince them to do is to find a little part of their time, especially now and as they grow older, for politics, whether it's provincial, municipal, federal, doesn't matter, and frankly, couldn't care less which party it was. Just to make them understand that the decisions being taken today will be affecting them the rest of their lives. Because it was a big concern to everybody who was watching the 11 election to see that 2/3 of young people aged 18 to 25 stayed home. And that, for me, has always been a priority. So whether I'm in an elementary school, a high school, a college, a university, I always make the point, and I try to understand, especially at the university level, why they didn't vote. Part of it is they're so engaged in their local communities. That's the most engaged young generation in history, but they're engaged in different ways. So sometimes they're not convinced that what's happening in Queen's Park or in Ottawa or in Quebec City is of great concern to them, but the point is to try to convince them that they have to be involved in that too.
It was a little bit sad afterwards. A couple of the students came up to me afterwards, and they said they just thought how awful it was that their generation is going to be the first to not earn as much as their parents, right? And that's it says a lot about sort of the position we're in now. And
well, it's a question also how we got there, because the middle class is actually making less. The middle class is strapped as never before. They've got the largest household debt in history. And middle class jobs are being killed off, and Stephen Harper's solution is to take money from the middle class, billions of dollars, and give it to the richest 15%, which can only increase inequality. That's why even his finance minister, Jim Flaherty, was opposed to his income splitting. So we're going to keep going on that. We've got a clear plan for childcare. We've got a clear plan, for fairness, and people are starting to really take notice because they know that we can actually do it.
So I put the question, the word out to some people, some friends of mine in council in Bancroft, and then friends that live in Toronto, just to get different perspectives. And
how far out is Bancroft?
We're about 3.5 hours north of here.
Wow.
So
Okay.
it was a little bit of a trek.
It's country.
It was. So it's gorgeous, right? Like just a fantastic place to live on many levels, right? Like it's still very beautiful. A lot of land that has some great potential in terms of sustainable development, right? And I was really impressed when I learned that you had decided to resign over that decision that you spoke about today. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I was being pressured to sign an order in council that would have transferred land in a provincial park to private developers to build condos in what was called Mount Orford, or in French Mont Orford, M-O-N-T, Orford Provincial Park in the Eastern Townships, and I simply refused to do it. So I quit. They replaced me, and the very first act of the guy who replaced me was to sign that order in council. And what was interesting is it caused such a kerfuffle that they actually had to back down. They never did it. They were never able to try. And what happened was a lot of foundations and land trusts started contributing more to the park. So I just got word again last week that the park, that the area is expanding again. It's part of the Appalachian Trail system in that area, and there's been a lot more movement towards preserving land in the area. So it really brought a lot of people to realize everything that was being lost if we kept doing things the old way.
It's amazing, like sometimes it takes one person to take a stand like that, and it's...
It's part of who you are. It's something I've done before in my career. When I was president of the Quebec Professions Board, I stood up on a really strong question principle. George can send you some information on that. It had to do with sexual abuse of patients by doctors, and in Quebec they were simply refusing to prosecute those cases. And we went after them. We said, look, this is not on. But it was a battle to change mindsets, not just regulations or laws. It was a battle to change the way people looked at this as a problem, and we won. And now it's accepted, and the system is in place. Public is protected. If there is such a case, it's prosecuted. So it's good. But at the time, it was a big battle to stand up to them.
I don't know. I was very excited so excited I left this morning without my coat.
In minus 15.
At minus 15, so I got halfway here.
At least you remembered the toque. That was the most important thing.
It's got scarf and gloves, but no coat. So, starting the car up, and it's just a mess. So So I went through your website in depth and for the NDP, and I just thought that if you could talk about income inequality, and also with you touch on up the wage, hashtag up the wage.
Yeah.
That's something that I think is like just to increase that minimum wage is going to just level the playing field for a lot of people.
A lot of people don't realize that right now, across Canada, if you have a couple with 2 kids and both parents are working full time at minimum wage, they're living below the poverty line. And I don't accept that as inevitable. I just think that the government has a role to play in fixing that. It's something that Mike Harcourt did when he became NDP Premier of British Columbia a couple of decades ago. And it's something that worked really well. He upped the minimum wage substantially at the time, like from about $4.50 to $7.25 or something. So what you're doing is you're immediately putting money in the pockets of people who are going to spend it. It's going to make its way back into society, so you're actually encouraging a growth in the economy. So the federal government used to have a minimum wage. The Liberals got rid of it almost 20 years ago, 96. And we're saying, look, bring it back. And even though, the number of people under federal jurisdiction is, and the total proportion is not that high, what it is it's a clear signal to the provinces and territories as to what a fair, living wage should be for a minimum wage. $15 an hour, we think, is fair.
Yeah, it's sad to see. You see, like especially in the north, like you look at student loan and
student loans. Yeah. A lot of young people. I met a couple when we started out. We were calling it kitchen table tour. We were at a house in Sault Ste. Marie, and the young couple there, fair enough. They both had masters, and they're both going to do fine. But they were both just starting out, and they had a combined debt of $130,000. And how are you supposed to buy a house? How are you supposed to think of a family if childcare in Toronto for an infant is over $2,000 a month? So, but everybody talks about doing these things every election. We have a standing joke that a Liberal is in fact a Conservative who once every 4 years gets dressed up as an NDPer. Because the Liberals are going to be heading into this campaign trying to promise to do some of the things that we will actually do.
Yeah.
And they're good at that, but they did the same thing back with Jean Chrétien when they promised childcare, didn't deliver. They did the same thing back when we had the Conservatives, they didn't deliver. So we're actually going to make it a priority. Governing's about priority. I have sat around the cabinet table. I know what it is to make those tough decisions day in, day out. And we're going to make childcare affordable across Canada, available, $15 a day, 1 million spaces at the end of the exercise, and at the end of one mandate, almost 500,000 spaces in place across Canada. And we're going to get it done because it's going to be one of our priorities.
The impact of that initiative alone will be staggering to to help to ease the that suffering of lower income families. It's tougher. A lot of people need to work 2 jobs now, right? Or at least have 2 incomes in the household. So you see that. I don't know. I see that in myself as it kind of takes away from the it's sort of moving in the other direction of what I would define as family values, right? Like when you're pulling the family out because they have to work and there's no time for the kids, and
and it's almost always women who have to make the sacrifices in their careers, right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's and, in terms of, like with income inequality, right? Like it's there's so many different levels to that. Just those 2 words, when you put them together, I think of it conjures up First Nations, it conjures up women's rights, like in terms of what a woman's pay is compared to a man's, right? And there's so many.
But go right back to the beginning. The Conservatives just a few years ago brought in a law that restricted the right to have equal pay for work of equal value and threatened unions with huge fines if they contested it in court. And it's an absurd situation, and very few people noticed that when the Liberals voted with it, by the way, because they voted with the Conservatives on that. So it's an absolutely absurd situation.
Wow. It's amazing the stuff that so much happens that a lot goes under the radar.
Yeah.
It just it's such a shame. I had it might be an opportunity to speak about how you would be a better prime minister than the other candidates.
Well, we have a clear plan, and we're putting ideas on the table, whether it is moving the retirement age back from 67 to 65, or helping the middle class by creating the next generation of well-paid jobs, by helping small and medium-sized businesses to create the next, generation of jobs. We've got a clear plan. It's straight out there. I mean, people know my track record on sustainable development and the environment. They also know that we're not going to say things that we're not going to do. The Liberals excel at telling people what they think they want to hear, and then once they're in power, they do anything else. You remember them promising to get rid of the GST when they wanted to come back to power in 1993 under Jean Chrétien. It was the main promise in his Red Book. Of course, he had absolutely no intention of doing it. That's why he never did it. So people get cynical. They grow cynical. So what's different this time around is that there is a team of women and men that's offering to govern Canada in a progressive way as social democrats, making it a top priority to reduce inequality in our society, and everything that we're putting on the table seeks to do just that. With regard to the party itself, we've never been in better shape heading into an election. We're 8 months out from the election. Our numbers are way ahead of anything that they were heading into the 2011 election. And I always have a special place on my desk where I keep the polls that were published in the 2 weeks before the last election, that showed us in 4th place in Quebec. Of course, we won 59 seats in Quebec. So I take that with a grain of salt. My experience has always been the campaigns count for a lot. People will be looking at the NDP differently than they ever have. And people should also know that the NDP has 3 times as many seats as the Liberals. And we are the official opposition, and we are the ones who can defeat Conservatives. And we are the ones with a clear difference. You know, when I watched this week that Conservative go switch sides and go with the Liberals, I think that Mr. Trudeau thought he was pulling a really smart move. I'm not sure that it's been a smart move in the light of day. The average Canadian looking at that now is saying, hold on, this is somebody who's backed every single decision of Stephen Harper, and you think that there's no problem whatsoever with accepting her into your caucus. We have a strong ethical principle against accepting floor crossers, but that's a general principle that would apply to anyone. But in this case, think about that for a second. This is somebody who has faithfully supported every single thing that Stephen Harper has done for the past 9 years and has mocked the Liberals, and yet Mr. Trudeau sees an opportunity and just welcomes her in. I think what he's communicating is that there is not much of a difference between the Liberal agenda and the Conservative agenda, and if people want change, the way to get change is with the NDP.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's something, you know, you see, if Trudeau himself, I've seen flip-flop on so many issues, right? And you look, you see the names, everyone's taking a second look, right? Just because he's got I think partially because he's got the family name.
Of course, it's part of it. It's recognition.
And so you want to take a look, and but then it's like I cannot get a clear image of the guy. You know, it's like, whereas I watch, they watch the House of Commons, and he'll say something really, it's something that I would agree with, and then the next time I see him, it's something that's completely contradicted. So it's you do an amazing job as the opposition. You hold them accountable, and I'm one of those guys that watches on TV.
You get a seat back up there?
Oh yeah. We shut it down for a couple months to save a couple bucks, but it's something. There's not a very good rate of retaining our youth. The youth, the ones that do go away to school don't usually come back, right? So, in our municipality, that's one of the challenges: is how do we make this a place where people, how do we create sustainable economic growth that encourages the youth to stay here and enjoy the beauty that I moved up there for, right?
I liked your point at the beginning, and I think that's the only way to get it done right, is you've got areas like that where wetlands have to be protected, so you've got to make sure that you take care of the environmental, the economic, and the social at the same time. You have to have a social license for anything that moves forward. In almost every far rural region, you're going to wind up having unresolved land claim issues involving First Nations, Inuit, or Métis peoples. Yeah. So that has to be one of your priorities, to get that right for the future. And that's what we would do as well. We've also talked about food security quite a bit. We've got a great guy named Alex Adamanenko who led that file for a long time, and now it's Malcolm Allen and Lieutenant Ed Boisseau, and they're doing a great job. And as we go across the country, yesterday we were in another region quite close to the city, and people were actually doing urban farming and sustainable farming, and they were making sure that they had food, and a lot of that food for cultural communities that was being grown closer to town. So this is a movement across Canada where people are becoming conscious of issues that they didn't think too much about before, but how far the food travels to the table and what kind of conditions it's done in. So I think that those are things that can be inspiring people to homestead in rural areas that haven't seen new families come in a long time.
There's so much potential. Myself, being the only staff reporter, editor, I wander around that community like 7 days a week with my lens and talking to people and learning about their struggles as well as their triumphs. And it's
what's the population? in your-
3,500 in the winter months, and then in the tourist season about 35,000.
Wow.
So we're it's gorgeous. Baptiste Lake, the Eagle's Nest Lookout, fantastic landscape, Ontario Highlands, and it's so there's just like unbelievable potential in terms of doing things right.
Yeah.
And I see.
But that sort of pressure means that, for example, if you don't have things in place around your lakes, you're going to wind up with cyanobacteria.
Yeah.
And you have to sometimes go back and retrofit some of the older homes there because people are always resistant to that.
Yeah.
But we've seen that in a lot of cottage areas as well. You've got to work with the farming communities to make sure that you're measuring, your phosphates, what's coming into the system, what's leaching into the ground. So you have to have everybody on side to get that. It can be done right. And those can be incredible countrysides and places to live for generations to come. But if you allow those pressures, that type of 10-to-1 development during the vacation season, I mean, that's a massive strain and stress on those ecosystems.
Oh, it's and I'm seeing them trying to go down what I would consider the wrong road. I come from St. Catharines originally, and we see our farmland just disappear.
Yeah.
Like it's every time I go down, it's like
Yeah, it's a provincial matter, but I mean, the province of Quebec has a very tough set of laws, as does British Columbia, to protect agricultural land. Here in Ontario, not so much.
Yeah, he's ready to go. So.
He wants to have the fight.
Yeah.
Good.
So he texted me, the question about proportional representation.
Well, we're the only ones talking about it, and there was a good paper that George is going to send you that was recently published in the paper called. Yes.
I have no idea.
We just published a paper on that. I did. Published a paper on it. They'll send it to you.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's interesting because the Conservatives and the Liberals have the Conservatives would never have it. Now it's interesting because the Liberals always talk a good game on progressive issues. They are against proportional representation. And the reason they're against proportional representation is because it's against their interests. It's interesting because as an ethical proposition, the NDP pushing for proportional representation is actually
Opposed?
Well, it refers to
No, it's not.
the article. It's Lead Now's paper.
Common ground.
Common Ground.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
I'll send that to you.
we published something there. So, we're proposing something that would have actually reduced our number of seats in the last election, and would have brought, for example, the Green Party up. But that's what a question of principle is, right? That's what a position of principle is, and we're saying, as a principle, it'll produce fairer results in our election. So the NDP's for it. We've been pushing for it. Craig Scott, who we're in his riding actually right now. Craig
Sure.
Scott has done a magnificent job on it.
Well, it's something we need it to happen, right? Like
Absolutely.
we're not being represented fairly.
No.
Like it's just plain to see when you look at it, right? And it's I remember when they tried to add it to that one election where it was so confusing, right? People were not.
Provincially, yes.
Yeah, like they just didn't understand the question, and I think it makes. How could it not make sense? Like, of course you want your vote to count, like completely. Right? It's not a race. It's not a competition. This is a country. So I'm an NDPer, right? I have voted Green, voted Liberal once strategically, which I wouldn't do again. But
Tell your readers that.
yeah, but it's so in this case, it's like I see the Conservatives. We've got to get them out. Like I met Bill McKibben in New York City out front of Trump Towers at the People's Climate March. Interviewed him for Now this year. And he said, he was talking about, like what this signified, like having 400,000 people in the streets. And he says, hey, it's up to you guys to get that guy out of office. He said, he's making decisions that are affecting the world. He said, we have to make a change now.
Yes, I think that's a fair statement because it's also showing a very strong aversion to facts, to dealing with the real issue. This is a hilarious event that happened about 3-4 weeks before Christmas. I thought this was the ultimate slight, reminding Mr. Harper that he had once said that Kyoto was a socialist plot to suck money from rich countries. And when I quoted that back to him, instead of feeling the slightest shame, his caucus erupted in applause. They were all proud of the fact that he said that Kyoto was a socialist plot to suck money from rich countries. And Canada's become the only country in the world to withdraw from Kyoto. They are that right-wing, bizarre crowd who have, drunk their own purple Kool-Aid, their own blue Kool-Aid.
Yeah, it's a Tea Party. It's you see like, it's scary. Like we survived the Bush years, and then
and now we've had
now they've just changed heads, right? Like, So this is related directly to that. Is the cutbacks to science, right? Like you look at the cutbacks and the shutdowns of programs and provisions. For monitoring things like smokestacks emissions, food inspections, oil spills, water quality. 2,000 scientists dismissed. Like you mentioned, you said the words before, aversion to facts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, fact-based decision-making is one of the best tenets of good government. Unfortunately, Mr. Harper practices decision-based fact-making. So he comes up with his decision, which he's already, resolved in advance. Then he'll go about looking for anything that comforts him in his decision, and if anything gets in his way, then he'll just dismiss it, literally dismissing the scientists who didn't tell him what he wanted to hear on everything from climate change to any other subject. I mean, why do you kill the long-form census? Because you don't even have the information now to have social programs. Well, why would you want to have social programs? So you kill the long-form census. So it's a process. There's a method to their madness.
Yeah. Dismantling of something that's been
Dismantling of the state's ability to provide services to the public. Everything from the SMS system, the self-management systems for safety. These are, allowing railroads to inspect themselves, allowing meat packing plants to inspect themselves, instead of having information there for the public.
Yeah. Oh, it's bizarre, and that it can happen, right? Like with proportional representation, I don't think these type of things would happen, right? Like
you'd be forced to work a lot more in collaboration with others.
You see Canada Post, the CBC, same thing, right? Like well, not the same thing, but they.
Well, it is the same thing. Yeah. I mean, saying that you can't afford to have something that you've always had. We've had the home delivery in areas across the country, and now all of a sudden it's unaffordable. Canada Post has made a profit in every single year of the past 20 years, except one, the year that they locked up the workers. On CBC, they just can't stand the CBC. And they've been slowly but surely dismantling. But it should always be remembered that the Liberals actually cut 3 times as much as the Conservatives did. The Liberals cut $450 million from the CBC. The Conservatives cut $115 million. I always remind people of that, so they never let the Liberals off the hook.
Yeah.
Maybe we've only got time for maybe one or two.
One or two
Yeah,
minutes.
that's right.
Okay. You're talking today a lot about getting involved, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you could say a few more words about why young voters should get involved.
We have the most engaged generation in history right now. The young people are the most engaged, but they're engaged through their own media. They're engaged on social media. They can produce a result on a local environmental issue quite easily by getting together and on Twitter and Facebook and other means to get in contact with each other and produce a result. That's amazing and it's great. But if it means that they've also become totally disengaged from processes at Queen's Park or at l'Assemblée Nationale or at the federal parliament, then something's being lost, because the decisions being taken, for example, in Ottawa, are going to affect them the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
So I think that that's what people have to start to realize, is that young people are engaged, they do want to be part of it, but we have to be talking to them perhaps in a different way. One of the things that I'm proudest of about the 2011 result is the number of young people we've got. We've got really young people who are very engaged, and they're in and of themselves. They're a message that you can get involved and be part of producing positive change.
This is arts and culture. Where does that fit in for you?
It's a huge issue. Mr. Harper has, of course, the cuts to CBC are just the tip of that iceberg. But going back to the 2008 campaign, he came up with a whole bunch of cuts that actually cost him a lot, because everybody was reacting very strongly to his cuts to culture. You couldn't even travel the world anymore with different groups and troops and ballet companies and the like, because the money was being cut there. Canadians reacted very badly to that, so they backed off a little bit. But it's never been for them something that we should have as a priority. But a Canadian government is about showing Canada to the world also. It's part of the things that we have to do.
Yeah, you see, I think that there's a great potential, in this country to, we have this incredibly rich natural capital, all the resources you
Absolutely.
mentioned, right? And then we have this social capital, these people that want to make a difference, and I see in Bancroft there's permaculturists that are setting up farms and sharing food and not even charging for it, right? Just giving it away if it's needed. It's disheartening when people go, oh, that's socialist, right? And it's I was been, like I said, I've been studying like the NDP, but then also studying governments abroad in the United States and Barack Obama's campaign, and how he sort of embraced that term socialism, right? And maybe not saying it outright very much, but like when you look at the principles, it's like making society more accommodating to all, right?
Yep.
I just think it's, it's not a slam against capitalism. It's just there's got to be some kind of mingling there.
I think that's where you and I joined each other at the end of the conversation, where we started off together at the beginning, which is on sustainable development, which is just that. It's making sure that in our society, every time we take a decision, we look at the effects on the environment, on the economy, and on society. And that's the responsible way to develop in a region like yours, for example, or in downtown Toronto. That's the same thing. There are basic rules, they have to apply. When I was the minister in Quebec, I actually went so far as to change the Quebec Charter of Rights to include as a charter right the right to live in a clean environment, and it's built up lovely jurisprudence since then, so it's actually something I've done. I gotta let you go because these guys have got to get me out of here.
That is, I'm sure.
Awesome.
I really appreciate this. So
all the best, Nate.
Best of
nice
luck.
to meet you. And get out of here before you miss your coat.
Thanks, George. I have